Bastian now.
Welcome to the podcast, Bastian.
Thank you. It's very exciting to be here. Lovely to share with you.
Thank you, Bastian. We are so excited for this conversation. As we're talking today about developing a love of learning, as we get started, can you tell us what is the most fun thing that you've ever gotten to do as a student?
I love this warm-up question, Kian.
We're starting deep.
Well, I must say, I was thinking over, this thing. What was the most exciting thing? I must say, one of the things I enjoyed the most was in a biology lesson. The teacher had brought some hydra, and those are these tiny little creatures that have tentacles, and they find things in the water, and then they feed them into their mouths, which is in the center of their bodies. And I was just so fascinated to see those little creatures, and I just loved it, and that came to mind straight away.
Mm-hmm. So did you have to use a microscope for that? I don't know how big they
No,
are.
no, they're about 5 millimeters, so
Okay.
you can see them with a naked eye. But obviously, with a magnifying glass or something like that, you can see them much
Uh-huh.
better. I've looked for them. I've looked everywhere in ponds, but I've never been able to find any myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of students think about dissection days or like microscope days or the days that they can look at living creatures as highlights of their biology classes for sure.
Well, well, later on, somewhere would want to talk about my dissection lessons, but
Uh-huh.
maybe I mustn't run ahead.
Good thinking.
We'll see based on your answer what your future held. Did you go on to do biology in the future? Can you tell us a little bit about your background in education? Did you end up being a biology teacher, maybe?
So as a child, a 5, 6 year old child, I used to go through the garden and collect little insects and make little enclosures for them. And I had little zoos with insects, with a worm and a beetle and another beetle, and would catch bees in a jar. Anyway, that I think that's where my love for all kinds of little creatures started. And so when I came to making a decision as to what I needed to do with my life, other than doing a whole lot of youth work and enjoying working, especially with grade sevens, I don't know what it is, but I've sort
Mm.
of felt called to work with grade sevens. So, in my studies, I took a wonderful subject called bioscience, which was really set up specifically for primary school teachers. So you didn't go into great depths with everything, but you covered a
Mhm.
vast field of all the different areas, and I loved it. And it was just up my alley. So I really that was really what happened. And then my other major was geography, which sort of ties in quite nicely. I ended up teaching a lot of geography and not as much science, because I don't know why so many other people also wanted to teach the science and the biology. But anyway, I did in the end, especially when I became head of school. I said, now I will teach science.
That's great. How many years did you serve as an administrator, as a head of school?
For 20, I worked for 20 years
Wow.
as a in the government school as a teacher and going up through the ranks. And then basically the Lord pushed me into Christian education. I didn't want to go at first. But then when I did go, I said, well, Lord, give me a vision for Christian education. And he certainly did.
Mm.
I loved the journey. So for 20 years, yes, I ran a school from being a very small school in a house to eventually having a lovely campus.
Wow. Wow. Man, there's so many things that we could ask you about your experience with that. But our topic today is specifically around developing a love of learning. And I imagine that your interest in this topic and your experience with this is partially developed out of that vision that God gave you for Christian education and what it could look like to do that well. So
Yes.
maybe as we set the stage, you can tell us, why do we want to help students develop a love of learning? Why does this topic even matter at all?
I think it probably starts with myself. I'm not a linear reading, writing kind of learner. And so I've been interested in other ways of engaging students. And I've realized over time that there are so many students that have a different way of learning and understanding. So that's
Mm.
why I think I engaged in the topic specifically.
Yeah, definitely trying to connect with those students where they're at is so important. And as we start off talking about your article, you talk a lot about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Can we kind of
Yes.
just start by defining our terms? What do we mean by that?
So, so originally in schools, we used a lot of extrinsic motivation. That means, and we've done it with our own children at home and so on. If you do this well, you will get a chocolate, or if you don't finish your plate, you can't have ice cream, or we're always busy motivating children extrinsically in the classroom, stars, marks, all that kind of things. Everything is from the outside. But intrinsic means that children want to do things out of their own, out of the love of what they're doing and out of where they want to be. And so I think that's really so. One is the giving the motivation from the outside, and the other one is motivation that comes from within.
Mhm. Mhm.
How much are we able to impact their internal
Yeah.
loves? Because it's obviously very easy to give out a reward or a sticker. So how much influence do teachers have for that?
You know, I did a breakaway session at a conference with teachers. And what I did is I brought some simple puzzles along, divided them up into groups, and I then just said I gave them a time, and I said the people who come first will get a chocolate as a reward, and so that was an extrinsic motivation. And so I said, okay, go. And I encouraged them. And I said, remember, there's chocolate at the end. And they were busy building their puzzles. And the first group finished. And I said, right, everybody finish. And I handed out the chocolate. And then I carried on talking in a monotonous voice. And I just carried on. And slowly I saw the teachers starting to build their own puzzles because now they were intrinsically motivated. They wanted to finish their puzzle. It didn't matter if they were going to get a chocolate or not. They just wanted to do it. And so that is really a lovely example of how this kind of thing works. I think we all have a bit of intrinsic motivation for things we love. But sometimes so what started this all off is the fact that I read a book called Drive by Daniel Pink, and Daniel Pink is a behavioral psychologist, and he looks at what makes people and children motivated in that book. And so he writes a whole lot of things, and that really set me on the journey of looking at this intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for children and to help them to get to. So he also then talks about something called flow in the book, and that means. And we all have that. Sometimes when I'm making a PowerPoint presentation and I'm finding the right pictures and I'm looking at the wording and stuff, I forget about time. And that's when flow happens. And so you want to aim at getting children to come to a point when they don't actually they're unaware of what's going on. They're so intrigued by their subject and what they're doing.
I feel like there's a classic situation in a classroom where kids are watching the clock kind of tick towards the end of the hour, and then they're excited when the bell rings, or kids do the bell rings in the middle of some activity. You're like, oh, class is over. And they were so
Yeah.
focused on what they were doing and excited.
That's it. That's it. Exactly what happens. Somewhere in the past, I had to teach woodwork, or it was called basic techniques. That was the only lesson where they didn't just pack up their bags when the bell went. I'd have to fight with these children to stop building their models and that it was time to go to break. It wasn't even time to go to the next lesson. They just wanted to carry on. And that was a real beautiful example of intrinsic motivation. They were doing something they loved and they enjoyed it, and so they wanted to carry on.
Absolutely. And it sounds like, creating that space for students to experience that then helps them to develop that love of learning more naturally through just engaging in that activity.
My name is Katie, and I teach at Arbor Christian Academy. One of the classes I've had the joy of teaching this year is 5th grade English. Recently, I've been seeing a spark of excitement in our students as we study elements of the English language through the book Esperanza Rising. There was a moment in our study the other week that really made me smile. We were going to review some homework questions, and to do so, I set the task in front of them, as led by our resource, to have the students stand up, to act out the character according to their identity from that chapter, and then walk around the classroom as that character until I said stop, at which point they'd have to review their homework answers with the person closest to them. We did this multiple times with different characters from the text, and I got to witness an opportunity for these kids to express their analysis through a different medium. I saw some pretty impressive acting, from strutting around like horrid Tio Louise who burnt the house down and threatened the family's human rights, to Esperanza and her tears and her desperation as she watched her life crumble in front of her eyes. When we finished, the students sat down and one of them looked up and simply said, "Miss Mack, that was fun." This moment of bringing the book to life and making a simple change that let learning be enjoyable, I think it really transferred into the remainder of the lesson as we went to go analyze character responses and then make text connections to our own lives. I think that this portion is where a love for learning must be a part of the way that I set up my classroom routines and expectations. The reality is that as we talk about the themes in this book, like perseverance and poverty, justice, social class, human rights, basically the mountains and valleys of life, we're discussing themes of relevance in the homes and the lives of these 5th graders. So for me, I want to really pay attention to educational equity, fostering positive identity, belonging, purpose. And so hosting a space like that requires routines in my classroom that allow a flow during our class time, as well as really intentional expectations that create that truly supportive classroom culture. The goal is that these kids have a safe space to communicate openly and where our learning from one another is valued. And I've really seen that take off in our classroom. I want curiosity and critical thinking to be encouraged. So the more that we have that space to have fun, but to recognize that our learning really means something to us, that's where I've seen the students develop this love for learning when I'm with them in that class. Not only that, but I've seen their love for storytelling change. I never engage in a read aloud without pretending like I am about to win the Academy Awards for Best Actress. And so I try to model my own enthusiasm for learning. And I've really seen that enthusiasm transfer as now I hear students read with a little bit more life and a little bit more zest. So every class, before my students walk in the classroom, I really do consider the fact that this learning means something, that God is using it and He is revealing more of Himself through our studies. So for me, this is all the more reason to bring the fun, the exploration, the creativity, the celebration. And it's truly only with His help that I get to invite students on this meaningful learning pursuit and pray that He continues to transform them and their love for learning along the way.
So we'd love to maybe hear from you a little bit more about some specific ways to cultivate a love of learning in the classroom. And in your article, you laid out 4 different ways. So we're going to walk through those because I think around here I'm known for asking the practical questions, and I'm just really excited that this episode can bring some actionable suggestions for how educators can help create that space. We can't control the intrinsic motivation, but we can create the space for students to experience it and
Yes,
grow in that. So,
yes,
your
yes.
first suggestion was to make learning fun and engaging. So, what does this look like practically, Bastian?
Yeah, I think earlier on I mentioned something about dissecting a fish. It was not part of the primary school curriculum at all, but
Hmm.
we had to deal with the fish. So instead of turning to the textbook and saying, okay, copy this diagram or whatever, I used to go and buy some frozen fish. The staff in the kitchen hated me for it because then I brought all this fish into the fridge. Well, anyway, I took it out and and then we would cut it up and they would find the gills and they'd take the eye out and they'd find and that kind of thing. So by the time we'd done that, the children were so excited about the whole thing that drawing the fish and making conclusions and finding out what's going on really was a great motivation to those children. So I think that is a kind of a practical way of doing it. Obviously, if you are teaching maths, you have it's much easier to do something in a more practical orientated subject, but there are still maths games, there are puzzles, there are ways you can look at a historian how they worked through something, what was the background to it. I think we must never shy away from, and especially now because you just have to type something into your computer and you will find some of the history and some of the background. AI helps you. You can just find a thing and then you can embroider on that and really help the children to enjoy it. And of course, the best is if they would go home and go and research it themselves.
The second suggestion you had was encouraging exploration into areas of personal interest for the students. So how do you do that, and why is that important?
Um, so obviously, we do need to try and get the children to look for themselves and to look where they're going. I'm not sure. Uh, we have some schools employ something called project-based learning, where children would go and do some of their own research and bring it together and then start working together on that, on a specific topic. And that would be a good way of actually getting children engaged. I know that there are pros and cons to doing that. Some children do all the work and others do nothing, and the usual problems. But by getting children to look for their own information and look, it's going to work well with some children in some subjects, and it will not work well with other children in exactly the same class. But again, we talked a bit about different learning styles earlier on. And I think when the teacher is aware that there are children who are visual learners or children who are kinesthetic learners, and you employ some of those different teaching techniques, you will be hooking on to or getting that child to, oh, this was interesting in this lesson. He's not going to be interested in everything, but at least keep their interest by changing or mixing your learning styles. I think that is vitally important to get a good response.
As we're talking about passion projects and cultivating student creativity, this is reminding me of in my class, I actually had the opportunity to teach a class that was it was more for a participation credit. It was a class that was outside of the regular class subjects, and it was working on just developing study skills and research skills and overall skills for middle schoolers. And something that we had them do was pick a topic that they themselves were interested in, and then they got to dig into research on that and eventually did some sort of presentation. It didn't have to be like stand in front of the class. Could have been a model or a little brochure or a video or something. And it was very cool to see what they came up with when it was completely ungraded. Just what are you interested in learning more about? And then how do you kind of walk through the process of researching and learning just for the love of that? And seeing students who maybe didn't love some of the more traditional subjects and the things that I was teaching them come alive in, researching how a soccer ball is made or how do you open a bookstore and cafe. Like, just very cool to see all of that.
The third suggestion you have is about creating space for creativity and expression. Could you tell us more about that?
There are the children that we cater to most of the time, the reading and writing child, and then there are those that love the action. So the experiment you do, I know that if you're doing a physics or a chemistry experiment, it takes quite a lot of setting up and difficult. You've got to work at these things as a teacher. You can't just hope to just give them a textbook page and let them go on their own. And obviously there are more complicated or overlapping learning styles, but that really helps the teacher to engage the children and from all different angles in their class.
Hi, my name is Becky, and I am the K-12 music teacher at one of our TeachBeyond schools in South Asia. While some of my students naturally enjoy learning in music class, many others struggle to allow themselves to love learning because of the risk of failure or the inevitability of imperfection. My favorite solution to this is through incorporating as much music creation as possible into my curriculum. Yes, there is discipline and hard work and a sense of group achievement that comes from mastering a difficult part of a song or from learning a new chord on an instrument. But as I tell my students, we are created in the image of God to be creators. Whatever learning target we have for a lesson, I always try to have at least a small moment where the students are engaging with the concept and are allowed to make creative decisions with it. This could look as simple as my kindergartners taking turns to draw a roller coaster line on the whiteboard for the rest of the class to follow with their voice as a vocal exploration exercise. It could look like my third graders writing down their own 4-measure rhythm using quarter notes and eighth notes on a scrap paper that they then get to perform for a friend on an instrument of their choice. It could also look like the semester-long songwriting club I had after school with high schoolers last year, who worked together to write, refine, rehearse, and perform their own song at our spring concert. Often, no one wants to move on from these few moments of creativity. Students will ask me on their way out the door if we will get to come back the next day or the next week to quote-unquote finish what they started, and I smile and say, nothing is stopping you from finishing this at home and showing us in class next week. And they groan. But they also smile because they are walking out of my classroom one step closer to feeling confident at being independent creators, living out their fullest potential as the image bearers they are.
I'm just thinking back to when I was in the classroom. I'm sure you can think about this too, Bastian, that it takes more work and time and preparation to
Yeah,
plan for
that's the
these things
problem.
for them to go well. So I
Yeah,
really appreciate that you're pointing out what needs to be considered in order to set the stage for this fun and love of learning to happen. Again, we can't control the outcome, but there is an opportunity for teachers to consider these learning styles, to consider personal interest of the students and set the stage for that. But we do realize that as we're talking
yes,
about this is an investment of time. We know that it takes a lot of time. So
absolutely,
not saying
absolutely.
this flippantly, right, Bastian? Yeah.
No, and actually, what I would recommend is that you can always do one lesson and then leave it then do just your normal thing and then do another one. And if you teach the subject over 2 or 3 years, you will build up material that you can use again, and then it becomes more interactive.
True, yes, to start with something small, to start with one specific thing and then build on that each year. That's exactly
Yeah,
right, that's great. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
great
yeah.
suggestion.
Bastian, as we move to your last suggestion, you recommend celebrating achievements to help build confidence for students who want to learn. We'd also mentioned earlier in this episode about extrinsic rewards and giving kids stars or candy bars. And you mentioned how those are things you shouldn't do. You shouldn't do too many extrinsic rewards. Can you talk about how we celebrate achievements well?
Yeah, so I think with having an interactive classroom as well, with giving children opportunity to present what they have been doing, and to give positive feedback. I think feedback is probably somewhere in between the intrinsic and extrinsic limit, two sides of the scale, because if a child has been encouraged by just somebody paying interest to what they're doing and having a look and making some good comments, they will move on with that quite quickly. We all actually, everybody operates on the same lines. If somebody says, "Oh, that was well done," or "That was interesting," you'll work doubly hard at it the next time. And so I think that is something that lies somewhere underneath the whole thing: the encouragement, the interaction with the student, and that the student knows that they are important to you. And maybe all teachers need to know that all children are placed in their class for a purpose. It's not by accident. And especially when you're trying to do different learning styles and so on, you will have the children that are going to give you trouble. I don't think there's a single classroom around the world where there aren't troublemakers. But by engaging with those children, that is the best way actually to get through to those children.
Yeah, yeah. Man, having the opportunity to celebrate achievements and just walk with students through that is certainly a way to continue to foster their love of learning. I love that one. I always love a reason to celebrate. So even if it's a
Yeah.
small milestone, that can really
Yes,
help them then to
yes,
continue to
yes.
grow. Yeah,
Yes.
good.
Now, I just want to give you a little example of what happened actually just before the meeting. About 8 years ago, I had a little girl in grade 3 who wanted to start a Bible study. And she came to ask me permission. Little did she know that I wanted to cheer and say, "Hallelujah! This is the child. This is what I want in my school." Anyway, that child developed epilepsy and got depressed and went through a terrible time, and has now, in the last
Mm,
half year or so, joined an online school. And so the whole environment has changed, and they're helping her. And the online school suggests that the children have to do a kind of a social interaction project. And she has chosen to do a Bible study 8 years later because
mm,
I paid attention to what she was doing, and I just encouraged her and I said, "You can do this. I believe in you.
mm,
Here's a little book to help you, but I'm sure you can do this." And 8 years later on, I'd forgotten about it, but her mother sent me a message to say that she's doing this Bible study this afternoon. And that's just one little
wow.
word of encouragement that was placed in a child 8 years ago. And
Mm,
in the classroom,
mm,
that is vitally important, to just
wow.
keep those children, encouraging them, giving them encouraging words, praying for them, guiding them.
Yeah, we never know what the seed of encouragement will grow into in the future, right? It's so valuable to be able to invest in students that way.
Hi, my name's Harrison, and I am a science teacher in Asia. I've currently been with TeachBeyond for about 6 years, and I've taught in both Europe and Asia. I am always looking for ways to incorporate fun into the classroom, and I often do what I call explore activities when I'm teaching science. This is when I haven't taught students the rules for the lessons yet, but I just give them all the data, and I want them to try to put the connections together themselves. So for instance, instead of telling students what the different types of biomolecules are, for instance, I just give them 100 different printed and laminated molecules, and they have to physically sort them out on the table and categorize them and come up with names. And it's just a lot more fun than if I just tell them how to organize it to begin with. And then, of course, at the end, I kind of reveal how scientists organize it and stuff. But after they've been given a chance to dive in and sort through it themselves, it's just a lot more fun that way. I always say teaching is not about giving students treasure. It's about giving students shovels. It's one thing for me as a teacher to bring to students like this treasure of knowledge and to say like, oh, look what I found, or look what I know, look what I've learned. But it's another thing to give them the shovel and for me to say, there's a treasure in this sand, and I'm not just going to teach it to you. I want you to dig for it and discover it and find it yourself. And I think they value the knowledge a lot more when they can figure it out themselves. Because like learning is a lot more than listening. It's discovering. And discovering is really fun. I also love doing simulations and games for science. So for instance, when we learn about DNA, I give my students a DNA strand and they have to decode it and create a protein. And if they create the proper protein, then encoded in the strand will be these directions for where they can find candy on campus. And it involves a lot of paper and taping things together and running around the cafeteria. But it teaches them all about how the cell makes a protein. So the thing I love about simulations is that you have to complete all the steps in order for it to work. On a worksheet, like if you don't understand problem 1, you can probably just skip to problem 2 or skip around to different questions and stuff. But in a game or in a simulation, you have to complete step 1 in order to complete step number 2. And you have to complete step number 2 in order to do number 3. And that's just how God designed this world to work, is for those steps to be taken sequentially. And so I think it makes the game a little more fun because it just matches the real world more, and it's more fun than just being able to skip around on worksheets and stuff. You know, I expect that my students will forget the content of my class at some point, and they'll forget the very specific things that I ask them to memorize or that kind of thing. I mean, I hope that they don't forget a lot of it, but we all forget the content of what some of the content of what we've learned. But I don't think they'll ever forget how they learned, and most importantly, how they felt when they were learning. And if they can carry that sense of fun and appreciation for science with them for the rest of their life, I think that is what sets them up to encounter all sorts of things in God's world with a sense of wonder and excitement. And when our purpose in life is to know God and enjoy Him forever, I think we can enjoy Him a lot more when we have fun and when we carry that mentality with us. And that's something that I think high school is the best place to learn that kind of attitude.
Well, Bastian, as we're wrapping up today, we'd love to hear how you yourself have experienced personal transformation as an educator over these many years and the different roles that you've had. How have you yourself grown?
So the whole Christian school thing has really been a wonderful journey for me. Getting involved with teachers every year was different for me. We started with a small handful of teachers and children, and eventually we grew into a much bigger school. And so every year needed a different kind of management style. And so I think as they went, I went, and I grew, and I learned to pray more. I learned to rely on the Lord more. I learned
Mm-hmm.
that there were
Yeah.
many, many instances where I just sat down and said, Lord, how do leaders of schools do that don't know you? And the Lord really brought that across.
Mm.
But that was from a personal perspective, the growth, over the years. I've really enjoyed. I have a lovely Bible app, and it's really I my fall down. I buy new commentaries and things regularly. Hardly dare admit to that I've now spent another whole lot of money on a commentary, but that's made my personal Bible study so much deeper, and so we are always on a transformation journey. We can't,
Mhm.
if we are on fire Christians, and we were always on that journey, and so we are always being transformed. And I think it's important, because just like we being transformed, if we being transformed, then we can go back to the classroom or to the staff, and we say, I learned this today, and this is so great, and look, here's that really motivates those that are working for you, or those that are in your class, to also go and to investigate
Mm.
learning further.
So true. Yeah.
Uh, I love what you said about how we're all always on a journey as Christians. We're always on a journey of transformation, which actually leads us kind of perfectly to this final question we ask all of our guests. And that's, what is one thing that's changing your life right now? So this can be part of that long journey of transformation, because everything is. Or it could be also just something small that's changing your life right now. So I'll go first, and then Heather, so you have a little bit of time to think about it. Bastian, you can go at the end.
And I'll give a little forewarning that mine is on the lighter end. So I'm not sure it's on my transformation journey, but I guess everything in some way is. Who knows?
Uh, yeah, the thing that's changing my life this week is I'm reading a new book called Everything Sad is Untrue. And I'm not at the end. So who knows? It could turn out to be a terrible book. But right now, I've loved this book. I've loved reading it.
Mm,
It's just very beautifully written and a
mm,
really powerful story. So that's what's changing my life, is the book Everything Sad is Untrue.
nice. What's changing my life lately is that I got a new rug for my living room, and it's funny. I say that it's changing my life because it's covering more surface area in the room, and I really like sitting on the ground. And so I'm just really happy that I can sit on the floor and be more comfortable in my living room. And I love having people over, so there's just more space for more people now. Bastian, what's changing your life lately?
I play the flute. I'm a musician besides a teacher and a science teacher.
Huh.
And I have an app with beautiful backtracks. And this has been so wonderful because, if you play an orchestral instrument, you always sort of sit on your own,
Yeah,
and you always need somebody to accompany you or whatever. And so here I am. I can sit in my little office, and I can put on an orchestra, and I can play
that's
some
so cool.
amazing music. And if I make a mistake, it also doesn't matter. Nobody's going to look over my shoulder, and I can just have fun, and I can just enjoy it.
That is so cool. Well, Bastian, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation, for sharing from your wealth of experience. And I know that this will be helpful for our listeners.
Great. It was lovely being here.
It was great to talk to Bastian and these other Teach Beyond teachers about what it looks like to cultivate a love of learning.
For our weekly spotlight this week, we are focusing on Sparrow Project, which is a teacher education program coming alongside under-resourced schools.
To learn more about Sparrow Project and other openings with Teach Beyond, visit teachbeyond.org/go or click on the link in the show notes.
Kian, Bastian, and I serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. As you have heard, education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, Teach Beyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all He intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about TeachBeyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or find the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.
The mystery word for this week is church.